We have four distinguished panellists with us this morning. We'll hear a little from each of them before opening discussion to the floor in the style you've, I hope, become accustomed to over the last day and a half. It's often said that the vocational is seen as second best in Britain, and the reason we don't do more of it to a higher standard is because of a prejudice against it. But there is definitely growing interest in apprenticeships in recent years, and I think we've heard a lot of that over the last day or so. Yet there is still not nearly enough, we believe, at the advanced and higher level for young people in particular. And I was particularly struck by three key polling findings from the report that Ian Nash prepared for this conference, which is in your delegate packs. The first is the extent to which the public believe that most apprenticeships should be set at A-level standard or higher, yet government data shows that for young people, 2/3 are still set at level 2 or GCSE standard. So there is still a fair way to go in improving the quality of those qualifications. The second is the extent to which young people say they'd be interested in apprenticeships, but only 30% of their teachers have ever discussed the idea with them. So there is still an attitude shift that is needed there. And particularly concerning that 65% of teachers said they would rarely or never advise a high-achieving student to consider an apprenticeship. So that's the sort of backdrop. There are encouraging findings too. For example, the story which we led in the newspapers where more adults could see the value of a degree-level apprenticeship compared to a regular university or traditional university degree. So there are some changing attitudes, but we still think that there's a fair way to go. So to start us off in our consideration of the whole attitudes issue, I'm going to ask Ursula Renold to speak a little about the Swiss experience. When I visited Basel last year with Sir Peter Lampel and BCG, I was struck by the sense that parity of esteem there, which I've always thought is a difficult term in this country, but it's not a bureaucratic construct in Switzerland. It's a reality in the attitudes of parents and teachers. And I'm going to ask Ursula to tell us a little bit about why that might be. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm glad to speak to you about changing attitudes. I hope I wouldn't disappoint you because I have a different mindset concerning the Swiss system, and I will show you that. Changing attitudes, it's a difficult question because I have to say if you would like to change attitudes, that needs a lot of time. So I will start with a quote of a compatriot of your country, a quote that was made in 1900, but I think it's still something that we have to think about. And if I listen to all the speeches in this conference, I have to say I learn a little bit about the secrets working behind your system if we read between the lines of what the Miliband and Minister Hancock and all those important people said yesterday. It is also important that we are aware about those aspects of an education system because comparing system is so difficult. And even if we heard that Switzerland is maybe one of the world-class system, yes, that's right, but we are so different, I can tell you, when it comes to apprenticeship. I mean, it's a problem if we speak about apprenticeship because everybody all over the world think a little bit different about what they understand by apprenticeship. I tell you, the Swiss apprenticeship system, if you call that system, the most important feature is that a 14-year-old have to apply for a job as an apprentice in the apprenticeship market. This is a huge difference to other education systems. We have 2 out of 3 youngsters enrolling in an apprenticeship. Even I did as my first education an apprenticeship in a bank because I had enough of school. And half of the cohort of the Swiss people, they think at the age of 14, they would like to be integrated in an adult setting, not anymore go to school. And if I'm watching all the other education system, especially I'm familiar with the United States system, I think all over the same problem. The adolescence phase means from 15 to 20 years is very important from different aspects. I come to that. The second big difference in Switzerland is because it's so attractive to do an apprenticeship, you end up with 20 years having 2 tickets. One ticket is entry to the labor market, the other is entry to further education. So it's so, it has such a high added value to enter into an apprenticeship that, I mean, we have such a high quota. The other important aspect is learning in an enterprise environment is a win-win situation, not only for companies but also for government, because the Swiss apprenticeship pays off. It's a business model for host companies. And that means for government, costs are taken by enterprises by 60%. But they have a benefit out of this kind of apprenticeship that is higher than the cost. So this is an advantage for government because they do not have to pay a lot for schools and other facilities. Learning in an enterprise environment means you go with the technological best available standard. So we don't have to invest in schools for CNC machines and all that, because that you can learn in a company. These are some of the features, but now we are talking about changing attitudes. And when I was living in the United States and we started to talk about vocational education training, I suddenly realized I'm in the wrong place, because nobody is interested in vocational education training. They thought it's a good thing, but not for our children. And if I read the report that you made, I think some of your parents think similar. I couldn't understand that because I had this Swiss mindset in my head, and I know the facts and figures, and I say, well, why is it like that? And of course, it has to do with culture. It has to do with the tradition. David Holborn mentioned that in the Anglo-Saxon world, if you are looking at the political science literature about this topic, variety of capitalism, you can explain why the Anglo-Saxon world has a huge challenge to change the culture, because you have this so-called liberal market economy, while the Germans, the Swiss, the Austrian people are belonging to the coordinated market economies. The characteristic features are social partnership, wage bargaining, coordination among companies, which is an embedded culture in this economy. And that's maybe one of the reasons. I'm convinced that you can change it due to the globalized world. Globalization is helping here because we have a lot of multinational companies working in Switzerland, Germany, and other countries. And I think through this way, change is possible. Now, the Swiss example, 20 years ago. I'm in the business for more than 20 years in vocational education training. I was head of Federal Office for Professional Education and Training, running the system. But I have to say, I show you, we weren't all the time like that, as people nowadays think Switzerland is on the top. We had a big crisis on the apprenticeship market, mid-90s. And maybe we had the same discussion as you have actually about how to change apprenticeship system. What we've done after this debate in the 90s, we make a lot of progress. And this is, for me, if you would like to change attitudes, some of the aspects are very important. I mean, Alison Wolf mentioned it. Government needs nerve, and they should keep going for a long-term strategy, 20 years. You need 20 years if you would like to change it in this radical way as you wrote it down in the report. What we've done is we established a monitoring of the apprenticeship market. We didn't know how the apprenticeship market works. Offer and demand, what are the rationality behind? So we established the apprenticeship market barometer. This is a research we do twice a year, in April and in August. And since we do that, we know exactly where we have a problem on the apprenticeship market in the offer or demand. Then we invented this professional baccalaureate or vocational baccalaureate, which is the permeability from the vocational route to the university. And since we have that, we have no dead-end education. And this is so important to raise the attractiveness of VET routes. And it's also important to have a better social mobility, because if people from the VET route can go directly to university, this improves the social mobility. Then we invented a second type of university, the University of Applied Sciences, which allows people with an apprenticeship combined with a vocational baccalaureate a direct entry into the University of Applied Sciences. I'm also the chairman of a University of Applied Sciences in northwestern Switzerland, and I can tell you in 10 years these are the students which are most demanded on the labor market, because they do applied research and they are these high-skilled people which know exactly what companies need in order to be innovative. Another aspect we did in the end of the 90s, reform of the commercial employee occupation. This is banking sector, insurance sector, travel agency, everything that is in the field of a back office. It's the most prestigious apprenticeship in Switzerland. A quarter of the young people are doing this. It's a kind of general apprenticeship where you can go on with this kind of apprenticeship later on. Why was it so a big reform? Because we convinced companies that they do assessments in this field. And since we have that, they are much more engaged, banking, insurance, retailer, everything in the service sector. And this was really a strong reform because it affects the whole vocational education system in a way that we talk not only about job-related tasks, but also about general education. Because banks, insurance companies, they were eager to know what is the standard in math and science, because they say if we do an apprenticeship in our field, we need high general education. And maybe Alison Wolf also, she mentioned a little bit that our apprenticeship system has a huge amount of general education, which is sometimes underestimated in the literature, but this is keen and this is important to have later on a mobility in further education, and it simplified the entry into the university system as well. Another aspect, we did a VPET legislation reform. We have a new constitutional article and integration of 5 fields of occupation: health sector, social work, arts. We have an apprenticeship in dancing, forestry and agriculture. So after the reform, it covers the whole range. And I'm aware about the discussion we had this morning. It's so important that you improve apprenticeship in the service sector, because all well-developed countries are going toward a service industry, and that's why you have to offer attractive routes in this service sector. The last thing we established, we had almost nothing concerning research in vocational education training in the 90s. So we established so-called leading houses, Swiss University, which start to analyze some kind of aspects of the VET system. And from that, we know now cost-benefit analysis of companies. We know exactly in which occupation we have a benefit and where we do not have those benefits. And this kind of research influenced the development of vocational education training. So after the reform, now you see the apprenticeship market is quite in a good shape. 2013, we have 95,000 apprenticeship places in the offer. 87,000 is the demand. All the time in a market, you need a little bit more places than you really need in order that young people have a choice. Behind this system is, of course, the partnership. Commitment of all involved stakeholders is so important. And I mean, that's the big difference to your country. The green part, the professional association or industry association, they are in the driver's seat in Switzerland. If we would like to have a new occupation in the field of retail, in the field of whatever you say, music instrument builders, companies are coming to the federal government and says, we would like to have an occupation. And then we set up a commission and they develop the curriculum standard. So the content is defined by companies. Of course, teachers, supervisors are involved, but the main decision makers are host companies which are member of a professional association. Cantons 26 are responsible for implementation, supervision. We control every host companies once a year. They have to fulfill quality standards, and they are the supervisor of the VET schools. Confederation, the job I had for 12 years, we were responsible for strategic management and development, monitoring of the system, and I called myself the facilitator of the system, not the driver of the system. So, is it still worth to do an apprenticeship? In my new job, actually, as a head of research division at the Swiss Economic Institute in EGHZ, we are just analyzing the degree mix of the small and medium companies in Switzerland and the impact of to the innovation performance. What you see is we have 4 groups of qualification or degrees. Share lower means people with only compulsory school or being in an apprenticeship. It's about, the sample is 30,000 companies, and the average is 32% of people, which is quite a huge amount. But I do agree with Alison Wolf, that's a problem for the future. So if you don't have at least an apprenticeship or a higher education, you will face a challenge in the next 20 years. Shared trained means those with an apprenticeship end up with 20 years. You see, this is the biggest amount, and it covers service sector, industry sector. It's stable over the time. 47% of the people of the SME have an apprenticeship. Then, of course, professional education, training diploma, or University of Applied Science degree, 14%, and university degree, to my surprise, only 5.6%. So, Mr. Schleicher was quite kind yesterday, but 10 years ago, OECD criticized Switzerland due to the fact that they have only 20% university enrollment rate. Actually, if we show that, we have to say it was a good thing that we were against this policy of OECD. Nowadays, they realize that maybe that's a better mix for companies. So changing attitudes, as we had a big debate at the beginning of this 21st century, we end up with a constitutional reform. And the topic that you have for this panel, you see, is now also in the Swiss constitution. We had the debate also as you have it. But now, confederation and cantons in the federalistic system of Switzerland, it has to work together. This is Article 61. The third aspect of this article is important. They, confederation cantons, shall ensure in the fulfillment of their duties that general and vocational courses of study achieve equal recognition in society. This is quite a good thing that we can now discuss with society. Please be aware that we should do something. The bad thing, and now we are in the same boat as you are, we did a poll about the status of vocational education training in Switzerland, and you see it's all over the world the same thing. I mean, Swiss people realize that you can have a better or equal good chance on the labor market outcome if you have a VET degree, but the social status of VET is bad. So that's why we are running now a research project in order to analyze why is it like that. Changing attitudes needs a lot of time. New action towards a clear vision, strategy, and a long-term goal. What do you like to see in 20 years? What is the system, the UK system, that you would like to have in 20 years? A long-term commitment of funding agency, VIPs, people from different generations, they should work together, being committed to those vision and goal. You need role models on place, like your trailblazer, for example, and a clear leadership. I mean, without leadership, if everybody thinks the other department is responsible for putting on place the action, that's a problem. Then I think also what would help in a liberal market economy is if we are building up a network of people who are working together in order to strengthen the topic of vocational education training. And as Michael Barber said it, I mean, it's the topic of the 21st century. Then what I've learned from my experience, it's good to have a tension between activists and society, which is mediated by media. In 2003, we had again an apprenticeship crisis, and my minister told me set up a task force, analyze the problem. We did it. And after that, we published every month a press release, and we informed the society about the situation on the labor market. What I learned from that is journalists, they are changing all the time. And they are asking us, why is the problem on the labor market like that? They are publishing articles about vocational education training. And it raises the collective social awareness about VET. And after 10 years, I have to say, we all the time published every month a press release, even if we don't have any news. But it was incredible to realize that the media, they pick up some elements, build up a story, and this is so important. And panel discussion, as we have it here as well. Of course, much more is needed, but these are maybe the most important topics. Now, long-term strategy and intergeneration project was also my experience. If you run project over 10 years, you see that you have a change in persons, especially young people are leaving jobs, coming in, older people are retiring for jobs. It's very important that from the first beginning you integrate very young people in your activities. Trailblazers needs time if you would like to decide about a 3-year apprenticeship. One trailblazer, a second one, second release, third release, parallel evaluation, research. Then you start again, and from the trailblazer to the upscaling of a countrywide introduction of a system, I mean, this is a challenge. It's only to show you that you need a vision that lasts 10 or 20 years, and behind a public campaign, commitment of all partners, a constantly dialogue among all the partners, and then I think you will shift the system. Thank you for your attention.